Presenting Was the Stigma of Print Mythical? In this presentation, I will be looking at Stephen W. May's paper, Tudor Aristocrats and the Mythical Stigma of Print, originally published in Renaissance Papers in 1980. Stephen May's paper, Tudor Aristocrats and the Mythical Stigma of Print, appeared in Renaissance Papers 10, published by the Southeastern Renaissance Conference under the auspices of the University of Virginia, 1980, and is online at Shakespeareauthorship.com. It is an attempt to lay to rest the idea that there was a stigma print among nobles and discredit those who doubt the Stratford paradigm. His paper is poor scholarship for reasons which will become clear by the end of this presentation. May's titles by topics. These represent the titles he names in his paper. There were 22 texts. 9 of the texts, or 40.09%, were translations of other people's works. 6 titles were of religion. It's 27.27%. 4 of the titles, or 18.18%, were about politics. 9.09% were about court life. And 2 were poetry, again 9.09%. The total is more than 100% because of overlapping topics in some titles. We begin our analysis with the 31 authors he mentions in his list. The years that are in this chart are the years he presents us with. The ones with question marks, we don't know, but he did say 1500s for many of them. Notice this entry for the Countess of Lincolnshire at the red arrow. The Countess of Lincolnshire's Nurseries. Her book was published in 1622, 19 years after the Tudor dynasty ended. This should put a red flag in people's minds about what May was doing and how careful he was. Let's look at the rest of May's list, from Sir George Buck to the Duke and Duchess of Newcastle. George Buck first published in 1605, 2 years after Queen Elizabeth I died. Sir David Murray first published in 1611, 8 years after Queen Elizabeth I died. By this time, James I was on the throne, and the rules for publishing had begun to change. I'm ignoring the Stradling case because he does not mention which Stradling he was looking at. But given what we are seeing here, I would say that he published after the Tudor dynasty ended as well. Sir Thomas Roth's first was published in 1614, 11 years after the Tudors left the scene. Sir John Beaumont's Book of Narrative Verse was published in 1629, 26 years after the Tudor dynasty ended. This hardly qualifies him for being a Tudor aristocrat. Sir Richard Fanshawe first published in 1655. Again, we have to exclude him because he came well after the Tudor dynasty ended, 52 years after, to be precise. Lady Mary Wroth first published in 1620, 17 years after the Tudor dynasty ended. Again, the rules were different for publishing, and society had changed. Finally, the Duke of Newcastle first published his works in 1649, 46 years after the Tudor dynasty ended. These 10 writers must be eliminated since they published after 1603. I can see that perhaps May missed one author out of his list as being part of the Tudor era, but 10 out of 31 authors, or 32.25% of them, seems to me to be sloppy scholarship. We also have to eliminate the royals from his list. Henry VIII, Queen Catherine Parr, and James I could have published anything under their names, simply because they were the royalty and nobody would question them. Now we have 18 authors left of his original list of 31, or 58.064%. These three nobles, Edward Seymour, Thomas Sackville, and Edward de Vere, wrote front matter, so they would not have been listed as authors, so we eliminate them from the list. It was perfectly acceptable to be known as a patron of writers and composers. Now we have 15 authors left, or 48.387% of May's original list. 11 authors who remain translated others' works, so they need to be eliminated as well, because classical scholarship and translating non-fiction was acceptable. Now we have 4 out of the original list of 31 authors, or 22.222%. And yet, Sir Thomas More wrote on politics and theology, Sir Anthony Cope wrote on history, Sir Edward Hobey wrote on military strategy, Sir John Harrington announced an invention, among other things, but we'll leave these to be fair to May. Let's add Sir Francis Bacon, just to be more fair. Now we have 5 authors left of the original 31 authors he lists published during the Tudor era. That's 27.777%. However, Sir Francis wrote on the natural sciences, cryptography, philosophy, history, and the law, and many of his works were published posthumously. I created a list of 87 anonymous and pseudonymous noble and clergy authors who published between 1480 and 1623. I took the data from the Dictionary of Anonymous and Pseudonymous English Literature, new and enlarged edition by Dr. James Kennedy, Volume 7, the index and second supplement published in Edinburgh by Oliver and Boyd in 1934. In my list, I have 31 Stuart authors, actually early Jacobean authors, and 56 Tudor authors. But let's eliminate the Stuart/Jacobean writers from the list. Now we have 56 authors, of which 14 are clergy, or 80.05% of my original list. Let's remove the clergy from the list because not all of them would have been the sons of nobles who wanted to keep their hands in both the religious and the secular camps to see how their family would fare. We end up with 42 Tudor authors in my list, or 48.27%, as opposed to 31 authors in May's complete list. Already we can see that there's a problem here. But we were left with 5 authors in May's list. We eliminate the royal author and 4 nobles from my list as well. The royal author was Henry VIII, who published anonymously or pseudonymously in 1542, according to my research. But we have to get rid of Pierre de Valois, Juan González de Mendoza, Edmond de la Huette, because they were nobles, so they probably didn't feel as obligated to publish anonymously or pseudonymously. We are now left with 26 Tudor-era nobles who wrote anonymously or with a pen name, or 29.9% of my original list of 87 writers. That is more than 5 times the number of nobles left in May's list. We can conclude from this cursory examination of the information I have that aristocrats were 5 times more likely to publish anonymously or using a pseudonym in the Tudor era from Henry VII to Elizabeth I than under their own names, assuming that May searched for all possible noble authors for his list and did not exclude any of them. May should have compared the number of aristocrats who published either anonymously or using a pseudonym with those who published under their own names during the Tudor dynasty, which lasted from 1485 to 1603. Here are the Google Scholar citation stats from February 11, 2024 for May's paper. There are 107 citations suggesting that there were 107 people who did not do their due diligence and look at his paper more closely. So we can conclude from this that May's paper includes aristocrats who published or wrote after the Tudor dynasty ended in 1603. Most of the writers he cites published nonfiction and/or translations of other writers' works, which disqualifies them as examples of aristocratic writers who published original drama or poetry, which is the issue underlying May's paper. 3 of his writers were royals, and nobody would challenge their right to publish under their own names. 3 aristocrats wrote material for the front matter of books they patronized, which disqualifies them as examples because their names would not have appeared on the title pages of the books as authors. Nor should we forget the principle of dérogations. The principle of dérogations stipulates that certain jobs and avocations are not becoming of the aristocracy. In other words, some ways of earning an income were literally beneath their stations in life. Aristocrats also didn't associate with, quote, the rabble, unquote. Have we refuted May's paper? Was the stigma of print mythical? Thanks for watching. Stay safe.